Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name's Benita, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 8th Site Advisory Group meeting, only our second online meeting, so I thank you in advance for any technical problems we might have with this meeting. Can we go to the next slide there, Aubrey? Thanks. We have a lot to cover here in the next hour, but you know that your input is very valuable, and if we don't make it through everything, we can continue the discussions at our next meeting. We'll start with some introductions and a brief project update, then dive into some main topics, the site access alternatives and design concepts for the site buffers and edges. We'll be sharing some of that highlights from the survey, and we will leave some time to discuss your ideas and input as a group. As a quick refresher, let's move to the next slide here. At the bottom of your screen, if you're using a computer, you'll see a Zoom toolbar, and we ask that if you're not speaking, you keep your microphone on mute and turn off your web camera. When you have ideas to share, please raise your hand. That's in the side there. If you push on the participants, and then there's a list of participants, and at the bottom of that screen, there's a raise your hand icon, or you can just type into the chat, which is also in that same window. We've left some time at the end for your questions after we wrap up our initial presentations. Let's go to the next slide. All right, before we jump in, we'd like to find out who is here. And when I call your name, just briefly introduce yourself and let us know what is your favorite stay-at-home activity. Let's go to this list here. How about Jane, here first on my list?
Do I have to raise my hand for you to? Favorite?
Not at all, not the same.
You don't have to see me either. So favorite stay-at-home is gardening and reading and painting.
Wow. Are you painting, like artistically painting, or painting your walls or painting your house?
Artistically painting watercolors.
Oh. Very nice, very nice. Okay, Mike.
Hi, well, I'm just hanging out. Favorite is I'm working out, and I'm going turkey hunting. So that's about it.
Ooh, turkey hunting. All right, I had a wild turkey once, and it wasn't as dry as a regular turkey, so I don't know. So we actually have two mics. What was that?
Best in a crock pot.
Ah, crock pot. That's good to know. All right, thanks, Mike. And we actually have two mics on the line this time. We have Mike from the city of Sandy.
Yeah, hi. I would guess my favorite stay-at-home activity is getting up to speed on the numerous flavors of online meeting platforms.
Wow, that is unique.
It's not my favorite. That's just what I've been doing.
Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, we've all been doing a lot of that. There's a lot of platforms out there. Let's see who's next up here. How about Andrew?
Hi there, everyone. Andrew at the East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. I think, yeah, probably also working in the yard and getting to hang out with my daughter during the day.
I agree with that. I'm home with two boys, and every day is take your kids to work day. So it's nice to be able to have lunch with them sometimes. Let's see, who's next here? Daniel. Oh yeah, I already said Daniel. Where did I say Daniel?
Yes.
No.
Okay, I did not say Daniel. Thank you for keeping track.
Daniel Newberry with the Johnson Creek Watershed Council. And no doubt about it, birding is my favorite stay-at-home activity, especially right now because it's right in the middle of spring migration season.
Oh, good. What's your favorite bird?
Oh, boy. Well, in our backyard, we had a pair of Western tanagers show up the other day. That was pretty cool.
Very cool. All right. Thank you, Daniel. How about Sean?
Hello.
Hi, Sean.
Hi, Sean with Surface Nursery, and because we are agricultural, we haven't been staying home. We've actually been able to work. So we've been very busy hiring a lot of people and trying to keep our social distance and, you know, doing what it takes to make it happen. So been real busy.
I understand is this their harvesting season?
No, we've already harvested and shipped. So now we're in our growing season. Yeah.
I got it. Good to stay busy, that's for sure. Let's see, who else do we have on the line here? I see Rosemary's on there. Did you want to say anything, Rosemary? Rosemary is married to one of the mics. I'm going to take that as a no. But feel free to chime in anytime that you want.
Oh, you weren't hearing me, were you?
Nope, I didn't. I hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, we're just hanging out, staying home. Maybe we'll go for a drive in the next few days.
Yeah. A good drive is always nice.
Yeah.
Especially out there, you guys have a lot of nice things to see. It's very scenic out there.
Well, just looking out our windows at our house, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Everything's blooming.
That's great. Let's see who else next. I don't see that I've missed anyone that's on the site advisory group. So let me move on to our speakers, and we have Dave, who I put last time, and I almost forgot him, so I'm going to put him first this time. Dave Peters.
Hi, welcome everyone. It's good to see you again. Dave Peters, Program Director for the Portland Water Bureau. And I guess my favorite stay-at-home activity, kind of like Mike, it's like, is that counted by the amount of time I'm doing it? In which case, it's staring at a computer screen. Really what I like to do, though, is get outside when I get breaks, and walking and working in the yard or and those types of things. It's just been really refreshing with all the time working from home.
Great. How about Jeff?
Good evening, everyone. This is Jeff McGraw. I am an architect, the site design lead, and I work with Casey, who you will be hearing from tonight. And my favorite stay-at-home activity, I think, is to manage food with 3 college students working out of the house. And somehow get enough food myself. So nice to see everybody. Thank you.
All right, that's great. Let's see, let's get to, since you mentioned Casey, how about Casey, come on up here.
Hi, everyone. Casey Hagerman, architect with MWA. My favorite activity has been on Sundays. My wife and I take a drive to a new river we've never been to. There's so many for our sanity.
Cool. Yeah. Do you actually get in it? Okay, good. All right. Next up, Ben. So on the architect team.
Good evening, folks. This is my first meeting with you, and I'm a landscape architect with NNA Landscape Architecture. My favorite stay-at-home tactic right now is to enjoy a deck that we just got done building last month. So it's been nice to enjoy the weather. So today wasn't such a good experience.
Maybe next week. I think next week's supposed to be a little bit better. All right, Mark.
Hi, Mark Graham. I am the project manager for the design team and an engineer. And my favorite stay-at-home activity is, I think, eating the baked goods that keep getting made in my house with lots of people home and having not as much to do throughout the day.
Yes. I hear that is a thing. Lots of baking is happening. I remember a few weeks ago we tried to get flour from the store and that did not work out very well. But we have flour now, don't worry. All right, did we get anybody else? Oh, Jason's here. Jason.
Yeah, hello. My name is Jason Hurst. I'm a landscape architect and I work with Ben at NNA Landscape Architecture. And my favorite stay-at-home activity is playing Legos with my son.
Oh, very good. Very typical of an architect, I think. All right. Did I miss anybody? Did anybody new show up? I think we're good. All right. So moving along to the next slide here, we're gonna jump right in, and I'm gonna turn this over to David to give us a project overview.
Hello again, everyone. We're glad to have you out again this evening. I think tonight's a little better evening maybe to join us, since it's kind of gray and wet today out there, unlike last month when it was beautiful and sunny. But we appreciate you joining us in either case. I just wanted to provide a bit of an update on a few of the things that have been happening since we met last. There's been, I think last time I mentioned, our team has moved out of our office and we've been working from home and able to work together through meetings like this, telecommuting. So I do a lot of FaceTime in front of the computer these days. And the things we're working on include we submitted our application for WIFIA financing. And that's a loan program through the Environmental Protection Agency that would fund up to half of the cost of our project with low interest loans. And so that would be something that would be a significant benefit to our ratepayers as a whole to keep rates down. And so we've been working with the EPA over the past month, just answering their questions as they do the reviews of our application. You've probably seen folks out in the field over the past month, and maybe even walking across some of your properties, as we've been doing some field investigations to support our planning for the pipelines. And last month we talked about releasing the filtration facility overview document. We will be updating that document in late June, early part of July, with this work on the pipelines, and then we'll call that complete document our project definition report. So we'll be having more information over the next couple months to share with you on those investigations. And then we've been working with Mark Graham, who's here this evening, and his team, as they've been helping us with our pre-design efforts. So we've been walking through all the different processes that will be part of the treatment system, and talking about what our needs are and what the sizes of those pieces of equipment would be, and different things like that. And so the nice part of these meetings is that having the design team with us now, you're able to speak with the folks that are directly going to be designing this. So all the things that you're able to share with us, they'll be hearing firsthand and be able to incorporate into their thinking and their planning and our development of this design. So next slide. And that leads us into the fact that your input throughout these meetings is going to shape what our project will look like. And we may not be able to directly show you that right away, and that's why we're creating the community benefits agreement. That's a separate agreement with our contractor, but a good neighbor agreement. That's the one we're working here. That we want to get your input and create that into a written document that will give us some guidelines that we can hold to as we go throughout this project. And even after we're done with the creation of that document, we're committed to coming back and working with you to show you how we're incorporating your thoughts and ideas. And this slide here, the two that are highlighted, traffic and site access and the landscaping, are the two topics that we'll be talking about tonight. And this list was the list we created in our first or second meeting back at the end of last year of the topics that were of concern to folks. And so we just wanted to highlight that our goal through these meetings is to walk through each of these and hear your thoughts and input and concerns, and so that we can take that into our design process. So you may see here, last month we talked about the light and noise. Towards the end of the meeting, we'll show you the timeline for getting through the rest of the topics. But yeah, we look forward to your input this evening. And with that, I think Mark Graham will start next to talk about the site access.
Thanks, Dave. As Dave mentioned, the design team is just getting going on looking at site layout alternatives. And as part of those site layout alternatives, one of the questions that that we need to decide on is how access to the site will be developed. So there has been a preliminary traffic impact analysis completed. Next slide, please. And this analysis is included as an appendix to the filtration facility overview document that has been circulated. And I think some of you have had a chance to review that document and this particular appendix. And the goal of that document was to identify feasible alternatives and provide some guidance to the deliberation on the determination of exactly how site access will be developed. So this analysis used engineering and county standards to look at potential traffic impacts and some of the peak hour trip impacts that will be generated by the facility operation, looking at the safety and capacity of the existing local roads. Next slide. Out of this report, it was identified that there would be trips generated by normal facility operations and maintenance, those people coming to work or leaving work at the facility during normal business hours. And since this is a 24/7 facility, outside of normal business hours. And then chemical deliveries and solids off handling as chemicals are brought to the site and solids that are removed from the water are hauled off the site. So it looked at primarily the peak hours between 7 and 9 a.m. and 4 and 6 p.m. and evaluated how the overall traffic would be impacted by these, the generation of these additional trips. Next slide, please. 4 potential site access alternatives were evaluated. One immediately adjacent to the site on Carpenter Lane. There were 2 options looked at along Dodge Park, one on the north part of the site, more to the east, and one kind of due north of the site down the bluff onto Dodge Park. And then there was a 4th alternative evaluated that was accessing the site off of Bluff Road to the south, and then following the existing easement access and road access north to the site, accessing the site from the south side. Next slide, please. We asked you about your opinions on how this site could be best accessed. And the feedback that we got, there was more support for Southeast Dodge Park Boulevard, that access around the curve and down the slope from Dodge Park, or from Southeast Bluff Road coming in from the south. There was some support for accessing the site from Dodge Park Boulevard due north of the site. And there was no one voted for accessing off Southeast Carpenter Lane. And as one of the participants noted, Carpenter Lane has a lot of traffic on there, people riding bikes, horseback riding, and then other community activities going along Carpenter Lane, which raised safety concerns. So at this point, well, why don't we go to the next slide, which has a summary of the comments that we received, some more details about concerns with traffic disruption for community activities such as schools, other economic activities, nurseries, and a lot of concern as represented in the lack of any votes for access off Carpenter Lane, being a residential area, the desire to keep traffic impacts away from residential areas. So at this time, if people want to offer any comments, expand upon their comments, offer new comments after seeing the results of the polling, is there anything that else we should bring up here?
Yeah, Mark. I see that Jane has a comment.
Great.
My concern would be that the site that you've picked from Dodge Park Boulevard is on basically a blind curve. There is not a shoulder on that road, and it also has a slope to it that was not created properly. In other words, when you approach that blind curve, quite often, especially in icy weather, cars slide off towards the riverside or north end side of it. And you would also have to have a road that would go uphill. So not only are you building it on basically leading up to or coming out of a blind curve, you are going up an incline. And so sight of oncoming traffic is non-existent, and or pedestrians and or bike riders. And there is relatively no shoulder on that road. As much as it is a better road than Proctor or Hudson or Lusted, the one where you get the biggest or longest sight advantage is on Bluff Road.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, I think we had noticed that the traffic study looked at, just by the numbers, the site distances meet the legal requirements, but in all of this, we want to do more than just what the law requires. We want to do, what's going to be, the best, safest option that we have available to us. Anything else?
Okay, so I'm looking out for anybody else that might have their hand raised.
Well, then,
Mike?
Yeah, I just have a question. Are you going to have 2 access sites or just 1?
Ideally, on a facility such as this, we would have 2 potential access sites. One, just in case due to some disaster, one of them was blocked. And I think, per fire code, we would need 2 accesses to this site. Now, one access could be emergency only access that would not be normally used. And there are other options for how you would arrange site access to have, like a visitor access versus an industrial access. Those could be divided at different locations. So yes, we would like to have 2 access points. The real question though is, how often would each of them be used?
Okay, thank you.
Now we have some comments in the group chat from Daniel. Do you want to ask those now, or should I read them, or what's the protocol
Sure.
for chats?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and ask. So one of the questions when I looked at the access from, if you decide to come north from Bluff Road, between Bluff Road and the property are some agricultural tax lots.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering how much they might be impacted by things like maybe widening roads or road building of any kind.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to point out that if we come in off of Bluff Road, the existing access road is not really an industrial access road, so it would have to be widened. It crosses over a little bit of Johnson Creek there, so that would have to be bridged presumably, or culverted. There would have to be some additional work to mitigate any environmental impacts that would be caused by widening that access road.
Yeah. And then my other question was, in the document, there was some discussion of some of the geologic formations up on the, where it goes down to the Sandy River that
Right.
looked like there was some kind of landslide risk. And I'm just wondering, could you talk a little bit about like how risky would it be to maybe have the heavy traffic or do road building, road widening, upgrading? I mean, is it a real risk of potential landslide for what we're talking about in this project?
Well, a little later on this evening, when we talk about some of the existing site conditions and observations, we'll talk about where the extent of that landslide risk is and the geological hazards on there. So yes, there is, of course, more risk on a slope that landslide could happen. The construction of a new access road up from Dodge Park Avenue would have to take all of those considerations, all of those risks into consideration, and would be built to modern standards. So without seeing the actual design, generally anything new that's designed is going to be an improvement in seismic reliability due to the improvements in understanding of the seismic risks and the newer standards that demand greater resilience against seismic hazards. So that would be primarily a cost that would have to be incurred that would make the cost of building a new access road through that geological hazard zone higher than some of the other options.
Thank you.
Does that get your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Any other observations about the general site access?
Mark, is
Jane,
the property though that you would have to go from Bluff to the filtration site? All of that land is currently being leased to nurseries. I don't know if Sean is leasing part of it as part of Surface Nursery, or if it's Ian, or if it's Spinks or Windy Ridge, or who is leasing the property. But the property to the south of the filtration facility site, I believe, is owned by Pleasant Home Water District, is it not?
David or Bonita, is there anyone that can help me with the property ownership question that Jane has?
Kind of, and Benita can fill in if she knows any more, but there are a couple of those properties that are owned by Surface Nursery, if I'm not mistaken. So I think
That's correct.
the ones to the east side and directly to the south are actually owned by Surface Nursery. And I think as you moved west, I think there might be a couple other property owners there. I don't know how much you actually own, Sean.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, basically we own everything south from Bluff Road up to if you start at the facility site, we have everything south. So we don't rent any of that. So where you're talking about accessing from Bluff Road north, that would be going through property we own, yes. We don't
Just one of the great reasons that we have Sean on this advisory group.
Yeah, so the only thing, we lease a couple we lease some acreage, I guess you'd say, to the west and some to the east. But basically there's like 100 acres there, so that we own all that. So it's not leased. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay.
I just, the last time I looked on portlandmaps.com, it showed ownership as being Pleasant Home Water District.
Well, Pleasant Home Water District owns, I believe, where the two water towers are. But
yes, and also the road that you access into your nursery stock, I think just to the east of that is a plot that's also Pleasant Home. And I can't remember the others.
Well, Pleasant Home has an access. They have let's just call it an access where they run their pipes underground. But
Right, a right of way.
yeah, right. But they don't, as
Or
far
an
as I know, they
easement.
don't own it. They don't own any of that land.
Yeah, they have some easements across properties that are owned by others, I think, for their pipeline, some of their pipelines.
Okay.
For example, they have two pipelines that go across our property to and from their water tanks that are on their site. So they have easements across our property that those pipes are located in.
Okay.
So while the traffic study showed that the impacts in terms of total traffic during operation of the facility would be relatively minor compared, even though the traffic is light out there, there would be few trips generated during operation. Construction is, of course, going to generate a lot more traffic out there. So at this point, we don't have the contractor as part of the team yet. They will be, the selection process is ongoing, and they will be part of the team before we make any definitive decisions about how to manage traffic during construction. But we want to get a jump on that evaluation, on that planning by evaluating the safety and capacity and potential roadway improvement needs. So our goals, of course, are going to be to limit the potential traffic impact on the neighbors, use community input through forums such as this to help guide our development of traffic safety and control measures, and maintain or improve the condition of the roads used for site construction access. We continue to define the treatment plant and the processes that will be used, and the site layout and the amount of excavation and construction that will go on at the site to get a better estimate of the number and types of truck trips that will be generated during construction. We are looking at the construction phasing, construction sequencing to understand when those truck trips will occur, and options for concentrating or distributing the traffic that is generated. And we are looking at site access options. The options that were just discussed, of those 4 potential site accesses, would be considered for not only for permanent access to the site, but also for access to the site during construction. Get the next slide. So as part of the polling that was done prior to this meeting, we asked what the best way to get trucks to and from the site during construction would be. Based on the overall regional map, there are a couple of logical ways to get to major arterials, going north towards I-84 through Troutdale, or going south through Sandy to US 26. The responses that we received were about equally split between these two options. There were no votes for going west towards US 26 through Gresham. And there was also a survey participant that said correctly that the best route would depend on where the material is coming from and going to. So I suppose that could be a defer choice of the route. Won't we go to the next slide, unless someone really wants to jump into this? We'll get to your comments in a couple of slides. There's also a question about what you felt were the best ways to manage traffic during construction. When we look at how to manage traffic, one way is to use one-way traffic, which splits traffic, but which makes traffic in some ways safer, but also limits access and restricts the ways people can travel. There was a fair bit of agreement that this was a good way, but there are also people who considered that this was not a good way to manage traffic. The question of whether longer work days are better than longer work weeks, those responses were fairly evenly split, with maybe a few more people agreeing that longer work days were better. There was a question about whether 2 site access routes were better than 1. 2 routes would spread out the impacts to a larger area of the community. but reduce the temporary impacts to any one area. There was some agreement that, yeah, it was 2 access routes were better. Whether that's better for construction or better for the community, maybe we could have been a little more clear on that, and love to hear your responses, your comments on that. There's also about a question whether trucks using established speed limits are better than trucks driving slower than other traffic. There is research that shows that differences in speed, whether they are faster or slower than the normal flow of traffic, can increase the risks of accidents and other dangers. Again, the responses were fairly split with, maybe 1 vote more on the agree side than on the disagree side. So we can move ahead to excerpts from your comments and an opportunity to provide elaboration or additional comment on on these slides. So some of the comments were that the best built road was Dodge Park, but the other routes coming up from the north were already going to be disrupted due to the pipelines. We had other general comments which you can read in there. Some of the comments about safety. I think safety is a really big concern during construction, and whether the trucks are going to, even if you do put restrictions on the trucks, are the drivers going to obey them? And are the best plans you make going to consider the actual behavior of drivers, both for the construction site and just general drivers in the area who may get frustrated with the increased traffic that occurs during the construction. So I'd like to hear from the site advisory group. Expand on any of these comments, offer new ones. Or do we have the input that you think we need to continue to plan the project?
It seemed like we were evenly split on that, longer work days versus longer work hours. And if anybody had any opinions on that, that would be great to get some feedback on.
I could see where during construction, having one-way street going in and a one-way coming out, and then changing that to a two-way street after construction is completed, so that if it were coming from the Bluff Road end of it, it would disrupt Sean's agricultural production for a period of probably 2 to 3 years out of the 5-year project, because a lot of the heavy equipment would be, my guess, in the first 3 years of construction, and then the property could be returned to Sean, and then any property loss in taking up a road from Bluff might be gained by returning a portion of the south edge of the filtration site for his use in doing stock growth. Just an alternative. I still think Dodge Park is going to be really risky because of the curve and the hill going up. Cottrell itself, it has an incline, and as it is, it's almost a blind 4-way. Well, it's not a 4-way stop. It's only a 2-way stop, and that's a real iffy for those that frequent Dodge Park. My husband always slows down to nearly 10 miles an hour. He's drives like a granny. That's just the way it is.
Thanks. Yeah, we do have information about where, which intersections have had the most accidents over the past 5 years, and I think that was the one that had accidents there. So, well, we appreciate your input, your thoughtful comments, and your opinions about what's going to be best for the community and for the project. We are still at the beginning phases of this project, so there's plenty of time to continue to explore this and come up with better options than we have so far. So if there are no further comments, we can move off of site access and move on to the next. Oh,
Mark,
yes.
I did have a question. When I look at the answer for the longer work days versus longer work weeks, I wonder if maybe we, the people who filled out the survey, didn't quite understand what you were saying. And specifically, I'm wondering, did you mean that 7-day work weeks were a possibility? I'm just going by somebody's comment that you had up on the screen. Are we talking about 7 days versus 5 days, or 5 days versus 4 days?
Well, this is in general. Typically, we don't see Sunday as a working day unless there is a really good reason why it would be. So we would be typically talking about, for this type of project, is it better to have 12-hour, 5 12-hour days or 6 10-hour days to get the same number of hours per week, as you're trying to get the project done as soon as possible. So that's what it is. So Sunday, I don't see that being on the table unless there was, there may be days when, the contractor would ask for a Sunday work to do some critical tie-in, or, there are some things that must take place over 8 continuous days or something like that. But I don't think we're talking right now about a Sunday as a normal work day.
But potentially you are talking about 5-day work week with longer work days, because I noticed somebody's comment was about wanting to have a break on the weekends from the noise.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the 5 days a week with longer hours would be better than 7 days with less hours. And I think, we read it as it would be better than 6 days with less work hours, a break from heavy trucks on the weekends. And it doesn't necessarily, these are, of course, just general thoughts. There's no, these are not specific alternatives that we're asking you to vote on at this point. And there are many shades in between, 6 full days and, 5 extended days, in terms of, maybe Saturday is a short day that starts later, and you have a half day, which can be very useful for contractors, because then they can use that day for kind of staging and cleanup, and use the partial day's work to make the other days more efficient, more productive. So these are the kind of things that when we have a contractor on board, we can work with them and they can make specific commitments that will have the least impact on the community while maximizing productivity and shortening the construction schedule.
All right, thank you, Mark. And I see that we have another visitor. Actually, I wanted to acknowledge that, Daniel, that was a great catch on that. 7 days a week. But we also have added, looks like Pat and Dean have joined us. Just want to get you up to speed, because we had at the very beginning asked everybody what their favorite stay-at-home activity is, and I don't want you to miss out on that. So what is your favorite stay-at-home activity, Pat or Dean? Anybody? You're out there? I know we'll give them some time to chime in on that. But binge watching Grey's Anatomy. Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. I'll take that one. They also said they agreed to the 5 longer hour days than the 6 days of work for our construction. So moving along, we have edges and buffers design concepts coming up with Casey.
Hi, everyone. Tonight, we're going to try to get through some material, and anything we don't get through, we're going to take up in the next workshop. And Jason and Ben are going to go over different strategies for edges and buffers and for any unused parts of the site. But first, I would like to quickly run through some existing site conditions that we're working with here and get any comments from you about anything we're overlooking. So our 95-acre site includes several zoning overlay buffer areas that will restrict certain uses of the site. For instance, the blue area in the southwest corner is a 200-foot setback from Johnson Creek that will help to keep development from impacting that watershed. In the orange on the east is the geologic hazards landslide buffer that was mentioned earlier, and this buffer keeps development on the site from within 100 feet of the top of that steep slope that goes down to the Sandy River, essentially. And just east of that overlay zone in green is what's called a habitat buffer from the west of Sandy River area. And this is also the direction where we have heard wildlife like elk come up from the Sandy River area up onto this plateau. So in addition to the buffers, the property has a 25-foot wide access easement on the west and some of the south side to allow PG&E to access their utilities, as well as the nurseries to access their fields. And so that we'll have to maintain that. And there are also these water easements from to the conduits that are about 15 foot wide. And those are around the center and the east part of the site shown there. And in general, around the edges of the site, we have a 25 to 30 foot property line setback that will have to be maintained for all areas of the site. Next slide. So as you're likely aware, this site is not flat and it slopes in several directions. The high point, which is on the east, the eastern part of the site, is approximately 740 feet in elevation, while the low part near the western edge is at 645, almost 100-foot difference. So depending on where you are on the site, the topography either is going to slope away or towards neighboring properties. So for instance, in the section that we're showing called BB in the upper right, this is cut through the area that is considered probably the most usable area for us on the site, where the slopes aren't as extreme. We have nice low areas to begin our excavation, and the elevations don't get as tall. Next slide. So we took a site walk around the perimeter of the site to better understand what the neighbors see when they look on this site. And of course, because of the topography, some neighbors, like on Carpenter Lane and from the west, which are shown in the photos 1 and 2, they're generally looking down on the site and looking at the low areas of the site. Whereas if you're on the southern area or the eastern area where those neighbors are, or where people from Bluff Road look up at the site, you have less of a view because of the topography slopes upwards. So these are all things we're keeping in mind, both for where we site the facilities and how we treat the edges and buffers. Is there anything, big picture items that we need to know about the site from your experience as a neighbor? Okay. Feel free to leave comments and other observations anytime. And so I'd like to turn it over to Ben and Jason, who are going to talk about some of our edges and buffer strategies.
Thank you, Casey. So edges and buffers preferences. Before we dig into the details of the edges and buffers design concepts, I want to quickly highlight the big picture feedback from the group. Based on survey feedback, the group generally liked the ideas presented for sites, edges, and buffers. The concepts of vegetated screening and agricultural use were the most favored. And community access is a bit contentious. That's not a surprise. Next slide, please.
Before we move on, Jason, I just want to do a little time check here. We're about 8 minutes away from wrapping this up, and I just want to get a feel for where everybody is on the site advisory group. If we want to try to make it our way through the next couple of slides and postpone the rest until we meet next, or do you want to try something
Jane
different?
votes to go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have a vote?
Yeah, I say
Go ahead.
Mike, what was yours? Go ahead.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay, Sean. All right, Sean, you good with going ahead?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, let's go ahead.
I would
Okay.
just like, this is Daniel, I'd just like to ask, how long is it going to take to really do this whole topic justice? If we had unlimited, I mean, if we had more time, how long would it take to do the whole thing?
15 minutes,
Jason,
I think,
15
until
minutes?
slide 28.
Okay.
Is that okay, everybody? Can give us 15 minutes?
Okay, by Jane.
Okay.
All right, I got plenty of time. I'm not going nowhere.
Yeah, I'm not either. I'm here.
I would be
Bad
okay with
points.
that. I'm okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
If anybody's really against it, we can, you know, just put it in the chat and we'll go ahead. So let's move along here, Jason. Thank you.
Okay, so we reviewed the kind of the overall responses that we got from the survey. And now, so can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so this in this slide, we're looking at possibilities for features at the site edges and buffers. On the graphic, you can see how the edges and the opportunities that are listed correspond. We also show the site access alternatives. As we're moving forward, we're considering the best ways to use the existing landscape and neighboring conditions at each edge to buffer the facility. The site is at 95 acres is relatively large, so there's probably going to be some breathing room, and each edge provides unique opportunities for different features. So as we move forward and figure out what's going to work best for each edge, there'll probably end up being a mix of different features on each edge. So next slide, please. So different edge preferences. The survey provided us lots of feedback. We have a good directive quote on this slide of what somebody wants to see. And in general, the forested and agricultural options were favored in our design preferences. On the west side of the site, there was at least one respondent who had a preference for some type of berms or landforms. So we can see there's, you know, it seems like there's some pretty good consensus on what options should be. But with that, we'd like just to take a moment and hear from you guys if you have any response to the preferences as we've heard them.
I'm not seeing any hands.
Nobody? Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so on to the individual concepts. One of the concepts that we're looking at is raised and shaped landforms, also known as berms. Some of the benefits of using berms are screening the facility, blocking sounds, and reusing excavated soil on site, which could reduce site haul-off or truck trips. Raised landforms are a concept we can integrate with other strategies also, such as vegetated screens. Next slide, please. Stormwater management. Every site generates stormwater. Some of the input we've collected includes questions about how the facility may change stormwater runoff from the site. And we want to say that stormwater is going to be managed on site. We've mapped low areas on the west side and the southern corners of the site. And one concept we are evaluating is created vegetated basins or ponds near those areas to help manage stormwater before it leaves our site. Next slide, please. Vegetated screening. Based on the survey input that we heard, vegetated screening is the edge design strategy the group finds most appealing. There's a whole range of benefits that the plantings can provide, and we're looking at a number of options, including oak savanna, forests, orchards, and hedgerows. Next slide, please. And the preferences we heard back from the survey generally indicated a preference for forest understory and hedgerows. There was a couple other responses that were classified as other that we're going to share in just a second. But there's also a respondent who thought oak savanna would be a good thing to look at. So next slide, please. Okay, so here's a couple really good quotes we got back from the survey. There's a lot of thought and information packed into these quotes. So it might take you a minute to read them, but I want to share the takeaway I got from them, which is that as we move forward with working on designing the site, we'll need to really pay consideration to both the native and the agricultural character of the site, and try to figure out how to make that work together. I think that could really help inform what the buffers look like. So with that, we want to invite you to share any thoughts you have about the concepts we just presented.
I'm not seeing any hands. I don't see any comments yet. Oh, looks like Daniel.
Yeah, just a comment about the southwest corner where it goes down into Johnson Creek. So as we saw earlier in the topo map, that's the steepest part of the property right there.
Indeed.
So I would just be concerned that whatever you did in terms of vegetation, that we looked at something that's really going to have a really good root structure that's going to bind the soil to prevent any kind of erosion over time or landsliding into Johnson Creek.
All right. Yeah, there's in that corner we haven't shown it also. There's also a water resource offset that we're going to stay out of also. But we'll take careful consideration not to plant anything there that's not going to do well.
All right. Anybody else have a comment or question about the information Jason has presented? All right, we can move on.
Okay. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben to talk a little bit about additional strategies.
Okay. Good evening. I'm going to go through the next 6 slides and point out a few things. A few of them you've seen. A few of the slides summarize your comments that you've just recently sent in. And I'll do a quick summary and pose a few questions. Then we'll pause and let you have discussion after that. So bear with me as I sort of rip through these as now I'm under time pressure. So agricultural uses. You've seen this slide before, and it shows different types of uses. There's probably other options as well. Based on your early input, we understand that there's interest in establishing agricultural uses on the edges and its aesthetics to this site, so it continues to allow farming on the edges. In the next, this slide here, some ideas you've provided earlier. You know, you've talked about pollinator plantings in earlier comments, and these comments that you just recently sent in, many supported growing nursery stock or continuing to grow nursery stock. Some supported demonstration nursery gardens or food crops, and then some supported producing food crops. One supported livestock. So one of the questions I want to pose to you that takes us a little deeper, would you entertain agricultural buildings like greenhouses that would be part of an agricultural use on the edges? So, and then another question, what do you think about the suggestion to incorporate educational programming with agriculture? So that's been suggested, but I'd love to hear some feedback on that. But let's go to the next slide first. So additional uses, we also thought about, well, the edges could be used for energy production. It could have a wildlife buffer, and which would also serve as a wildlife corridor. Site trails could be incorporated in the maintenance roads. Next slide. And so your comments came back. Many of you favored the wildlife buffer zones. A few like the maintenance road and trails and solar panel arrays. More in-depth comments were provided that suggested that the trails be used for jogging paths, and that a learning center be have incorporated into it a shallow pond for fly casting and operating model boats. This indicated to us that some of you would like to see a community use this facility. One comment urged the use of electric carts to minimize noise, operational noise of other types of vehicles. One comment put a qualification on including the solar panels, and I think you can read that comment there. Let's see, next slide. Actually, the next two slides, I'll summarize them because I don't want to spend your time reading them. You want us to screen the facility as much as possible. You advocated reusing excavated soil to build berms to reduce haul off. A mix of the concepts we presented, excuse my fax machine that's going off right now. You've advocated for a mix of concepts. Vegetated screens should use native plant species. And you've advocated for incorporating recreational uses in a learning center for the community. And you're making use of the natural landscape in Johnson Creek and other water bodies in the design. And you said make sure the area for agriculture is big enough so that it offers a big enough opportunity to somebody. So with that, I just want to pass it back to the audience and ask for comments.
First, can I just say that I'm amazed that you have a fax machine. That's great. But I wanted to point out that Pat had put a comment in the chat saying, we do not want to see any agricultural buildings on the east side of the property where we live. The educational possibilities with schools is interesting. Still concerned about the location of berms on the east side due to the slide area.
Good comment.
Anybody else have any comments or questions for Ben? Righty.
Did we capture your comments correctly? Because we're sort of paraphrasing them a little bit. Some of them are written directly, but we sort of just got them, so I'm still digesting them.
Pretty much so, but Mark and Jeff and the crew know that they'll be hearing from Jane anyway.
All right.
I'd love to get to know you.
Careful what you wish for.
We all love Jane. Always great input for us. All right, then I think we can just move on to the next slide if there aren't any other comments about what Ben presented, or are there any additional ideas about any of the information that we've shared that need a little bit more detail or clarity for you? Jane, do you have your raised hand? Did you have something you wanted to?
Yes, something we haven't talked about yet for the site as far as location or placement on the site, filtration site, is the backup generator. Are you going to perhaps have that closer to a road? And where is the facility going to get its electrical connection from? That's kind of, doesn't have to be answered tonight, but that part hasn't been discussed yet.
I don't know, David, if you wanted to address that at all. I will say that I know when we visited the JWC facility, I recall their generator was inside of a building and seemed
I
fairly quiet.
understand it would be inside of a building. It's just the location of that building. Will it be on the filtration site itself, or could it be like alongside the Bluff Road on the Pleasant Home piece of the property, or where do you intend to have that, or has PGE been in discussions with the committee on that placement? That's all. Doesn't need to be answered tonight.
Jeff, looks like you may have some thoughts.
Sure. We're sort of knee deep in establishing the Lego pieces of everything that we are trying to assemble on the site. There's some rules of thumb with emergency generators, and we know this is a noise source, and we're considering either acoustic enclosures or a building for the generators. They do want to be closer to the electrical equipment. They do want to be close to some of the heavy loads in the process, for instance, the ozone facilities. So they will most likely be internal to the plant and part of the the process structures, or close to the process structures, as opposed to on the edge like the JWC plant. That's our initial thinking.
And I don't have anything to add to that. So that's what we've talked about as a group. So.
Okay. Anything else about that? I see Pat also added a comment in the chat regarding solar panels southeast of the property. Land has been leased for a solar field panels. As I understand, no other solar panels can be placed within a certain distance of those panels. Is this true?
I don't know the answer to that, and that is something we will look into as we think about solar possibilities on the site. We'll have to double check that. I know there can be limitations in terms of actually connecting solar power to PGE. It may be the type of thing that this has used up the capacity they can handle taking without making improvements to their system. And so those types of things will be looked into as we get farther down the road and look more closely at the possibilities there.
All right. Thank you. That was from Pat. But thank you too. That's from me. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. If I don't see any other hands here or any other comments. But we don't want to keep you here all night. So we can talk a little bit if you have an immediate comment about what went well or what we could have done better, or what suggestions you have for how this meeting is happening online now. love to get any feedback. If it's not working well for you especially, then we want to make sure that we can do what we can to make changes and make this an easier process for you. So not only how this meeting went, but also with the materials that we're sending, if we need. Anyway, I got one comment already earlier last week about allowing more time. And so to give your survey feedback. And so we did that. But maybe if you have any other suggestions that would make it easier for you to give us your feedback, then please let us know. We're always open to new ideas. Next slide, please. So what's next? Next, for our next meeting, or on Thursday, June 11th, we will be talking about facility visual preferences. At the July meeting, we'll be talking about pipeline planning. Our pipeline manager, Ken, will be talking at that meeting and giving us an idea of all the work that they've been doing and the field investigations and how they've been trying to narrow down site locations for the pipes. And then facility siting is in August. So we have a lot of great things coming up, and I know that you are all interested in, so we look forward to having those conversations with you. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. You guys have been great tonight. We've got a lot of great feedback. Dave, did you want to say anything before we wrap it up?
I would just like to reiterate, thank you. All of this information is immensely valuable as we start thinking about what to do on the site, and your local insights are helping us and guiding us in that effort. I would encourage you, as Benita said, continue to reach out and contact us. Even between meetings, we've received emails and great thoughts and information from you that we're putting into our presentations and into our thinking about the process. So we'd love to hear back from you, and certainly anything we can do to make this process better. I realize it's a challenge being online during these times, but any thoughts that you have that would make this easier for you, we'd love to hear and love to incorporate as we move forward, because it sounds like it'll be a little while before we have the opportunity to meet again in person, and so I think our plan is, at least for those next 3 meetings, that we continue to do them in a manner similar to what we've done here. So, but thank you. We appreciate you taking time out of your evening to join us this evening. Probably not as scintillating as Grey's Anatomy, but hope you had a good time anyway. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.